Hey guys, it's Michael Kummer here, and in today's video I want to talk about the question if you should have honey on a ketogenic diet. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel and you click on the little alert button so you get notified when I publish more videos like this. For those of you who've been following my blog and my YouTube channel, you might know that I'm a beekeeper. So one of the questions that I got very early on was, well, are you going to eat that honey since you're on a ketogenic diet? And that made me pause for a moment and think about that, because I hadn't really considered including honey in my diet. In fact, I've been on a relatively low carb ketogenic diet, and on average I ate between 5 and 10 net grams of carbs per day, and I've been doing this for over 2 years now. And so when we got bees, I started thinking about how I can incorporate the honey, and should I incorporate honey into my diet. And so in this video I want to talk about the pros and cons of doing so and give you some advice that can guide you whether or not you should be including honey in your diet, because it depends on a number of factors. There's unfortunately not an easy answer, a yes or no answer. There are several factors that influence whether or not you should be including honey in your diet. Now before we get into the details, let's talk about honey real quick so you know what honey is made out of. Well, I'm not going to tell you how honey is produced by the bees, but what you should know is that honey is mostly sugar. In fact, it's a combination of fructose and glucose. And 1 tablespoon of honey has approximately 17 grams of carbs, out of which you get 16 grams of sugar. Again, a combination of fructose and glucose. So it's somewhat similar to regular sugar, even though the ratio in honey between fructose and glucose is slightly different. But it's obviously a pure sugar at the end of the day, with some beneficial enzymes and other components that the bees add to it. But at the end of the day, it's sugar. One of the main reasons, besides being a beekeeper, to include honey and more carbs in general in my diet were a couple of realizations. Well, first of all, I've been on as I've mentioned before, on a super low carb diet for over 2 years. And I've realized that while I didn't feel bad, I felt great in most days, I didn't feel as best as I could. So I've noticed that on those days where I included a few more carbs, I actually felt better than on days where I didn't. And what I mean by that is, for instance, I had to pee less often on days where I ate more carbs. My sex drive was higher on days where I had more carbs. Slight symptoms of the keto flu. Even though I've been on keto for a long time, I still got those symptoms from time to time. I'm not going to go into too many details on why that is, but it has to do with emptying glycogen stores and then replenishing them through a process of gluconeogenesis. So basically my body had to create glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like protein, which is a very expensive process for the body. And so that emptying of glycogen stores whenever my body needed glucose, during workouts for example, and then replenishing them slowly, was not ideal. The other thing that I've realized is that from an ancestral perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, it was very unlikely that our ancestors were in ketosis for years in a row, or even for weeks in a row. Whenever they found seasonal fruits, whenever they found honey, such as in the case of the Hadza, one of the remaining hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa that Dr. Gustin and Dr. Saladino, two of the guys that I follow, recently visited, they realized that they eat a lot of honey. Whenever they find a hive of wild bees, they go to town on it and they eat it. And during that time, they are most definitely not in ketosis. And so I realized that being in ketosis all the time isn't necessary, and it's probably also not ideal, at least not for me. And so I started including more types of carbohydrates, and honey was a very obvious one because it's animal-based and I follow an animal-based diet. So using honey instead of other sources of carbs was an obvious choice for me. So I thought more about the whole process of who should and who shouldn't include honey in their diet. And I think ultimately it boils down to what your goals are and in what metabolic state you are right now. If you just started a ketogenic diet for the purpose of losing weight, of treating or curing a metabolic disease, be it if you have pre-diabetes or diabetes, if you suffer from any other metabolic disease that triggered you to go on a ketogenic path to lose weight, fix those problems, then I don't think it's ideal to start including honey or similar types of carbs as part of your diet. Because if your body is not capable of efficiently and effectively using glucose as a source of fuel and then immediately switching back to burning fat and using ketones as a source of fuel, then you don't want to do this. You want to train your body first to be efficient in burning ketones and in burning fat. That's the ultimate goal of the ketogenic diet. And so if you're new to keto, if you just started, I do not recommend you include honey in your diet. However, if you're metabolically healthy and metabolically flexible, meaning that your body can indeed switch back and forth between different types of fuel, then by all means, I think you can, and you probably also should include honey and similar types of seasonal local carbs, like seasonal and local fruits, for example, in your diet. And so I've done a couple of experiments using two tools that I have at my disposal. One is a continuous glucose monitor from Levels that, as the name implies, continuously monitors my blood sugar, and so I can tell exactly what types of foods, what types of exercise, stress also, for example, influence my blood sugar and indirectly then also my blood insulin levels. And these two have then an impact on my ketones. And as far as ketone measurements, I use a breath ketone analyzer from Biosense. You might have seen that in another review. I'm going to link all of that down below in the description. But basically I've used these two tools to find out how honey in particular impacts not only my blood sugar, but also my ketone levels. I have stopped chasing ketones. I don't believe I have to be in ketosis all the time, but interestingly enough, I found out that eating honey doesn't impact my ketone levels for more than maybe 12 hours or so. And so what I've basically done is I've started including honey. And whenever I say, you can have honey, you cannot have honey, I'm not talking about, a quarter of a teaspoon or something. I'm talking about, significant amounts. So I started eating 1 to 2 tablespoons, big tablespoons of honey after lunch and after dinner. So every day I have between 30 to 60 grams or even 35 to 70 grams of honey. Depending on how new you are to the ketogenic diet, you probably know that you should have approximately 25 grams of net carbs per day to sustain ketosis. I had significantly more, 3 times as much on many days. And what I've noticed is that whenever I have honey, so my blood sugar would spike by approximately 40 points or so. But within an hour of that spike, my blood sugar would fully recover and be back to baseline. And so not a big deal at the end of the day, but more interestingly though is that my breath ketone levels wouldn't go all the way to 0. So if I measure in the morning, these days I measure in the morning between 5 and 14/8, which is equivalent to approximately 0.5 to 1.4 mmol per liter. So 0.5 is where nutritional ketosis starts. So I'm always in nutritional ketosis in the morning, and sometimes I'm even in the mid-range at 1.4 or so. When I eat honey, for example today, I had 2 big tablespoons of honey after lunch, and I've noticed a spike. And about 3 hours later, I measured my ketone levels, and my ketones were at about 0.2, 0.3. So yes, my ketones levels were negatively impacted, but my body was still producing ketones at that point. I wasn't completely out of ketosis. I was out of nutrition ketosis if you just go by the raw numbers, but my body was still making ketones. And in the evening, I'm gonna measure again later today, but every single morning since I've done this and conducted this experiment, and that's been going on now for 2 or 3 weeks, every single morning I was back in ketosis, even though in the evening I had another 2 tablespoons of honey. So that tells you that with only a break of, let's say, 12 hours approximately from the time of dinner or from the time I had the honey to the next morning when I wake up, that's enough time for my body to switch back to burning ketones for fuel. And that is the metabolic flexibility that you ultimately want to achieve. That should be your goal of a ketogenic diet or any diet whatsoever, that you either achieve or maintain that metabolic flexibility. Your body should be fine with whatever fuel source you give him, be it fat, be it carbs, and it should be able to switch back and forth. And if you're in that position, then I absolutely think you can and should have honey. The couple of things that are important when consuming honey is make sure it has never been heated, so it definitely has to be unpasteurized. It should be raw. Ideally, from a health perspective, it should be local, so you get exposed to some of the local pollen and impurities and everything that is part of honey. So don't be afraid. Even if you're on a ketogenic diet, you can include honey in your diet. If you want to, measure your ketone levels, measure your blood sugar, see how your body reacts. But ultimately, I've reached a point where I've gone from paleo to keto to carnivore to more animal-based, and I feel really comfortable where I am right now. I don't chase ketones, I don't check my weight, I just go by how I feel, and I've been feeling great, and honey has been a great addition to my diet. It doesn't negatively impact my ketones either. I mean, I don't really care if I'm in ketosis every single day or not anymore. Again, I just go by how I feel. But whenever I test it, I am in ketosis, and that is fascinating to me, because if you would have told me that a couple of months ago or a year ago, that you can have 60 grams of sugar per day from honey, that is, and still be in ketosis the next morning, I wouldn't have believed it. But that's what my take on it is. So again, if you're metabolically not healthy, if you're trying keto to lose weight or to get to a metabolic health and flexibility, I would hold off on consuming honey. But if you're metabolically flexible and healthy, then by all means, dig in, enjoy local honey. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, let me know in the comments what I could have done better, and I'll see you next time. So just at dinner, low carb, no carb dinner, and I'm gonna have, I guess 2 of these tablespoons of organic, raw, unpasteurized honey, and we'll see what it's gonna do to my blood sugar and ketone levels. So it's the morning after I had 2 big tablespoons of honey after dinner, and obviously my glucose readings are all well. I'm going to show you the graph here in the morning, and now we're going to do a ketone test and see if I'm back in ketosis or if the honey kicked me out of ketosis, and so we'll find that out here in a moment. So let's see what it comes back with. 7. So that's 7 ACEs, or the equivalence of 0.7 mmol per liter. So I'm clearly in nutritional ketosis. Honey didn't do anything to me. What it did at the moment, my blood sugar spiked. My ketone levels likely went down, maybe even to 0. I don't know, I should have measured, I do it today. But the night was enough to make my body go back to using fat for fuel and produce ketones. And so that's metabolic flexibility, and we'll see how it goes today in the next few days.